Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is an award-winning author who loves to discover little-known history and bring it to readers. Her historical fiction spans the mid-19th century to World War II, with characters standing up for something in their own time and place. Her writing has been recognized with many awards, including the Will Rogers Silver Medallion, a WILLA finalist, the Military Writers Society of America, and Grand Prize Hemingway. When not writing, she demonstrates 19th century folkways, gardens, and weaves. Welcome to Authors Over 50, J.L. Janet Oakley.
Hi, thanks for having me here. This is really an honor.
Janet, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, I always say I started writing when I was in second grade. I wrote the very famous Funny Bunny series, which I illustrated myself with great encouragement from my parents. My mom saved everything. So I also have little stories about kitties and puppies and all that. So I was pretty, second grade fair writing. And then I think in fifth grade, I wrote my first historical because I was hearing all these family stories. On one side, my great-grandfather was a surgeon at the Battle of Gettysburg. He was a Union surgeon right in the thick of it up in Seminary Ridge. And then on the other side of the family, my mom's grandmother, she went west at 12. Her parents were Quaker, and they were at Shawnee Mission, right smack dab in the Civil War. So I have all these different stories in my family. So that started coming out. But then I would say that I got a degree in history, and because of the history, I really leaned more into into nonfiction. Some of my jobs over the year, I also did singing. I started singing in high school, so I started writing my own folk songs. I was really into Judy Collins, and all the other greats of the 60s, because I'm over 50, so those are my people, the songs I listen to. So anyway, I also, when I went out to Hawaii, and from there, the story goes on. I ended up working at Mission House's museum as a guide. And I think that really informed me about history. But we moved back to the mainland in 1977. We had lived on the Big Island. And I think a few years into living here and trying to get a teaching job and all that, I had a dream about a guy in the snow surrounded by German soldiers. And I told a friend of mine who, she had a yarn shop, but she also was an editor. And she said, oh, you should write it down. So I wrote it down and I showed it to her. I think I hand wrote it because we didn't have a computer. And because I'm over 50. So anyway, she said, well, this is good. You should write a novel. I'm going like, what? I don't know how to write a novel. But I did. And that's how it started. So it's been a long journey. The novel is The Using Affair. It's about Norway and World War II. I knew nothing about Norway. And that's where I started from.
Wow, that's just fascinating that you chose a country that you knew nothing about to write about.
I know. And, this was really, I'm coming up with 29 years ago. So I definitely, was starting to write in my late 40s, but I did not really get it published until in my 60s, really. So, but because I was trained, I had really good education at my school with how to do historical research. And I'd actually been an intern at the Smithsonian. I was a stipend student after I graduated from college. So all these things, they became my grounding on how do you go about doing this. So, and, I think one of the questions, well, what did I do next? Well, was go to the library, because again, there really wasn't an internet back then. And I did a lot of interlibrary loans and stuff like that. And one of the books I found in our local library, and it's called Blood on the Midnight Sun. And it was a compilation of different stories about Norway. Because in my little thing that I wrote up, my little draft, there was a fjord. And I thought, well, if it's a fjord there, it has to be Norway. So I just started reading. And then up at our university, I started going through, I was teaching up there. So I went through the regular stuff that's part of European history, and I found these two books, these green books that said Norway on them, volume 1 and 2, and it turns out they were written by British naval intelligence, and they were secret. And you're going like, okay, these were not allowed to be shown to the public back then. It's full of maps. It tells everything about the trains, everything an agent going into Norway needed to know. And there's a whole history behind this division that developed this book, because Ian Fleming was part of that geography group. I mean, there's a fabled book. So I just read. And then I also live in a part of the world where we have a lot of Norwegians. Many Norwegians migrated to our area, some for logging, some for fishing. And so Norwegian Americans, they're all over. And I was introduced to initially 5 people who were young people during World War II. They were members of the Norwegian Men's Chorale. And I would go out, and they were so kind. I never recorded them because, I was warned that one family, the wife had lost all male members of her family because they were accepting parity. So I'm entering into this thing now because I wanted to write about ordinary people. It's fun to write about spies and all that, but I really wanted to get a sense of rationing. I mean, things that we sort of heard from our parents, what it was like during World War II in our country, rationing rubber, and my parents had great stories. But I think the thing was, this is so foreign. What is it like to be occupied and brutally occupied? So that's how it started.
Well, that was certainly real research. We didn't have Google back then.
Nope.
You really had to sit in those libraries and figure it out. I'm really impressed by that. Have you ever been to Norway?
Well, that was the interesting thing. So one of the first places I went and talked to, I'd never gone. So I was relying on the spy books, actually had excellent maps, and talking to people. And then just the interlibrary, I was getting down to books written in Norwegian, which I didn't read at all. So I'd have a Norwegian or English dictionary and reading things. Now I'm doing pretty good at reading Norwegian. I'm still working on it. But I think, I finally went. I finally went 4 years ago. And when I got off the plane, I was eventually met up with a cousin of a good friend of mine here in town. They live in Trondheim. Because my story takes place in Trondheim, Norway. Most people write about Bergen and Oslo. Trondheim had one of the monsters of World War II in that town. And I'd gotten this little tidbit out of the Blood on the Midnight Sun. So when I finally met a friend of this cousin, she's a wonderful woman. The family ended up taking me in. I wasn't planning on a homestay, but I ended up being taken into the family and staying with them. And they took me everywhere. But the first thing that her friend said, Margit looked at me and she said, "You got my town right." And she said, "Everything you described is right. How did you do it?" And I'm thinking World War II spy map, because it laid everything out. And the center of Trondheim hasn't changed that much. It's kind of like an ice, the river kind of almost goes around it. There's bridges to get into the main part of town. And it has the most gorgeous Gothic cathedral built over where St. Olaf was buried. So, I mean, and that has everything around there is history. But I also laugh because I connected with someone who's been posting World War II pictures taken by German soldiers. He's been doing it for like over 25 years. And Tora met me, and took me around all the worst places that the Gestapo was at. So I always tell people it's a magnificent city, but I went on one of the weirdest tours of where everything was hidden, you know.
So intriguing. Well, Janet, once you wrote this book, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
Well, back then, it was get an agent. So I started attending, really focusing on my writing craft. I started attending conferences. The main one here in our area is the Pacific Northwest Writers. And they had wonderful, things on how to write. You could get a chance to pitch. You learn how to pitch to agents. And I did get full reads. They said, send it in. But back then, we're talking again 20 some years ago, people go like, World War II? No. But then they tell me about their relative who was in World War II. And then the other thing was Norway. Well, who's writing about Norway? It was not really on their list at all. So I finally, my last time before I went ahead with the arrival of digital book. One of the things I did is Amazon ran a contest called the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Contest. And it was run about I think it was 2007, 2008. I think I entered in 2008, so it was a year. And what it was, you could submit up to 3,000 words. And if you got picked, you could see what it looked like. They were working with CreateSpace. And I think what Amazon was doing was testing out the Kindle, because it's exciting to actually see your words and you can turn the page. And so actually, I always tested. One of my first novels I tried was Tree Soldier, which is about the Civilian Conservation Corps here in the Pacific Northwest. And just east of me, I have a 10,000-foot mountain that gets annually about 110 feet of snow every year. I mean, and it's really white today because of the snow. But anyway, I tested with that. And it actually won the quarterfinals. It went through 10,000 people submitted. So I was becoming familiar. Back then, they said, don't put your stuff on the internet. Someone will steal it. But actually, it's the opposite. People take notice. So finally, when they really looked like things were solid, I created Tree Soldier and published that just to see what would happen. And it won a bunch of awards, So, and I had one of my friends that I met on this breakthrough novel contest. There's a bunch of us that are really good friends. We were in the chat room being just totally silly. And we're still friends. And he became my book designer. He designed the exterior for the book. So anyway, that's how it started. And then from there, I made that leap. I tried, I did a couple more books that way, but Justing was always my baby, the story about Norway in World War II. So I did submit it to a really big place, and the editor said she really liked it, but that's not what they were accepting. So she sent me over to another division. And then they bounced back and said they were not doing historical thrillers. And that's when I made the decision. Okay, now I'm going to put this thing together and put it out in the world. So it did take a long time. I mean, you were asking, how long does it take? It took literally 20 some years to finally put that first novel, which was greatly pared down. It's a monster. It's still a monster. But, you get to a point in your story where you know that if you cut anymore, it will destroy it. You really can't put it in book 1, book 2. You have to tell the story the way it is. So.
Well, I don't think that 20 years is unusual for some of our writers. Some of us write and then put it in a drawer and don't come back to it until we have time in retirement or much later. So I don't think that's very unusual.
Yeah.
How did writing your first book change your process of writing?
Well, I think I still continued how I went about research. So actually, Tree Soldier, I was working on a teaching. I have a teaching degree, so I was mostly ended up subbing, although I worked in the woods for the local school district. And that was fun. So the whole idea about how you do research. So again, I interviewed guys that were in the Civilian Conservation Corps. And you're really lucky when you get a chance to talk to people who live that life because they're no longer here. But I think I knew that I needed an editor. So right off the bat, I found someone to edit. That's really crucial. And I was still doing my own interior formatting and stuff like that. There's good formatting programs that you can get a good looking book. But I'm still pretty much away. One thing I think is that I learned how to write fast. I'm still slow because I want to do that research. And especially with the Norwegian novels, I feel a heavy responsibility. Because I've had people come up to me, Norwegian Americans, they tell me their stories, and some of them are heartbreaking. But they tell me thank you. They no longer say, well, you're not Norwegian. They say thank you because our parents did not talk about this. And so I feel a responsibility, and that's why it takes me so long with those stories that I'm going to get it right. But I am writing faster. My chapters are faster. And that's because I did something called Kindle World. So a really good friend of mine, Toby Neal, she's from Hawaii. She grew up in Hawaii, and she writes really great. They're kind of romance, action, thriller books. They're really good books. And she got a Kindle World with Amazon. And what this was is that you became a licensed fan fiction. So you could write in her world. And so she asked about 4 or 5 of us if we'd join her world. So I wrote one called Saddle Road. We used to bow hunt up on Saddle Road, the Big Island, which is about ready to be washed over by the lava if the volcano keeps moving. But I wrote that. And from writing a novella, I didn't even know what a novella was. And from doing that, I was able to learn how to write faster. So I have to say my chapters are faster now than they used to be, but it's still the same old. Well, I keep a book now too. I'm not using things like Scrivener where I put my notes up in the internet. It's all on paper or it's on the computer printed off. So, and lately I've gone to notebooks that I have, and I started doing that with the Kindle World stuff because I had to keep a track because I'm using her characters and I'm creating my own characters. You have to know that the main character really well. So I started writing stuff down. So that's something that's new. That's different. And of course, the first time there was no internet. Now I know how to find trusted resources. I know how to, contact people. I've been having the most marvelous conversations last year with historians in Norway because I needed to know about U-boats. And I have a spy map for the town. I know where the U-boat pens are, but I need to know certain things. How did they function if I'm going to have the story work? So some things have changed, some have not. Definitely one of the big things is Google Earth, because it is amazing that you can walk through an area. I could compare it to my spy map, and some things have changed because it may have been bombed out, but some things are the same. And that's the other thing that we have now. We didn't have back then.
Well, you do such extensive research. Do you do all of that research up front before you start writing, or do you do it as you go along?
Well, I think over the years, a lot of people that write historical fiction, we get to know what we're writing about pretty well. So we can refer back to that. Then when you start a new thing, like I'm writing about Bergen now, and I didn't know anything about Bergen except I had the spy map. I have a wonderful 98-year-old friend who was a young woman in Bergen, lived right across from the U-boat pens. She is telling me details you would not get out of a book. It's amazing. But yeah, it's pretty amazing.
What about publicity for your books? We writers want to write. We don't want to promote ourselves. What have you found that worked or even that didn't work?
Well, and initially it was like submitting it to contests. So I like Tree Soldier, the first one I put out. I submitted it to Epic Awards and actually won an award, and it's won several awards. But that was the first way. I mean, I was lucky if I could get a little blurb in the newspaper, but that's gone now. So what is now, and then probably, maybe 15 years ago, blogs started becoming popular. You try to get on that. But lately, with these novels, like with Tree Soldier, I ended up being a speaker for Humanities Washington. And I ran around the state for 2 years talking about civilian conservation camps. We had about 20% of the forests in the United States in Oregon and Washington. So a lot of kids came out from the East and the South. We had a bunch of kids go from Alabama. They ended up on the other side of the Cascades working on soil redemption. So I wrote about that. And so giving talks, that's one way that I get my books known, because I have the research behind me. I can talk about, stuff in a PowerPoint, the stuff that I discovered. So that is another way. And, the weirdest thing was the pandemic, because I was doing a few things on Zoom, but all of a sudden I was being asked to do a lot of things on Zoom. And I'm a member now of the Sons of Norway. That was the first breakthrough. It was in 2019. I was back east for the Historical Novel Society conference, and I had been invited by the Sons of Norway Lodge, which is a very important lodge in Washington, D.C. And I was invited to come and speak because someone had read Youth Sing. And again, it was one of those things where you're scared to death. Okay, I better really show what I know. And they gave me a stipend. So after I was done with the Historical Novel Conference, I went and talked to them. That was a changer. I became a member of that lodge. And then I also joined the Daughters of Norway here. So these are very specific, pinpointed things that I'm looking at. And I think sometimes with marketing, that's where you go, because frankly, it comes down to word of mouth. Word of mouth, people forget. So if you're able to do a Zoom talk, I'm talking to a group in Georgia next month about the Quisling Factory. They chose it as a book club. And I think technology has also changed how we can reach readers. So I understand blogs not so much anymore, but if you get on a Zoom or being a guest on this is wonderful,
Well, I think so. And I was like you, I didn't know what Zoom was. And now we Zoom into people's living rooms all around the country for all these
around the
book
world.
clubs and around the world. So it's really made our world so much smaller.
It definitely, and it's a wonderful marketing tour. In fact, COVID hit, and I was launching Quisling in late July, and everything shut down. Our wonderful bookstore shut down. That's where I was going to do it. And I had just done a Zoom talk with a Sons of Norway Lodge group somewhere, I can't remember. And I did a PowerPoint. I went like, oh my goodness, you can do a PowerPoint on Zoom. So I contacted the bookstore. I said, if it's all possible, I'll be happy to launch virtually. So I was the fourth person to launch. I had people from Canada, all over, and I gave away a book. I said, look, I'll pay for that. And they said, we've never done that. That's like, I'm like the fourth person, but they said, we've never done that before. I said, yeah, I'll pay for the shipping. Will you choose a winner based on the comments and on the Zoom chat? And it turned out someone locally won it, but I was ready to send it to Toronto if I had to. So it was very successful. And it's up there on YouTube. That is another important thing, is that I can put that on my website. I can tweet it out and so on and so forth. So.
Well, tell us a little bit about the passages that you've brought to share today, and then read from your book so that we can hear your tone and voice.
Okay, well, this is the Youth Sing affair. So this is the one really taught me how to write a novel, although I did not publish it until, like 25 years later. So in my story, my character is about Norway, about the last 12 months of the war. They were occupied by 400,000 German soldiers in a population of 3 million. 3 million people were in Berlin. That's how sparse Norway was. But you almost had 10 to 1 people German soldiers to one civilian. So my character is working with what was called the Shetland bus. And I'm going to Shetland this summer. I'm so excited. I'm going to actually see where these boats were launched. But they brought arms and agents back and forth. In 1944, they now are using submarine chasers. So my character's working that. He's also pretending to be a deaf fisherman. So in this story, only one person knows that he can talk. He signs when he's with other people, and his friend has kind of struggled to learn some sign, and they only talk, and he's gotten sick. He's gotten pneumonia. So this is a moment of crisis where they've got to call the doctor. And also they're looking for some boys that ran away, and the Gestapo and soldiers are looking for these boys. So they're searching every single house. So in this scene, he's very ill at this friend's house, and the German head is going to show up. As Grimstad predicted, sometimes after 11, there was a banging on the door. Outside in the summer light, Mayor Pettersson stood with 3 German soldiers, one of whom was an officer who introduced himself as Oberlieutenant Schiller. Schell led him into his studio where he showed his own papers. He had been dreading this moment since Grimstad left. He had never counted on having a sick man on his hands. Jens was always in control of himself. Now he was not. The lieutenant was an efficient but pleasant man. Like some of the regular troops in Norway, Schell thought he was trying to be helpful as possible. He was still a young man, and with his full red cheeks and limp brown blonde hair, he looked like a baker's son. It didn't change Schell's distaste or fear of him. He handed back his papers. Now, your man. Schell pointed towards the kitchen with a pounding heart, led the way. At the doorway to the little room, Schell stopped. My man is ill and asleep. Wake him, Schell ordered. Schell tipped over to the bed. The light from the kitchen fell near Hansen's pillows. He was sleeping propped up and with his mouth slightly open. His breathing sounded shallow and labored. Even in the gloom, his face appeared flushed and tight over his cheekbones. When Schell picked up Hansen's paper, he stirred and groaned slightly. Schell prayed he wouldn't open his mouth and start talking. He lives with you? Nay, he has a place on the fjord road. I brought him here to take care of him. Scheller shuffled through the papers. What's wrong with him? His accent was thick. He used a pencil to note items in the papers and didn't look up as he asked his questions. He has a high fever, influenza. You can ask Dr. Grimstad for his report. Schell eased onto the side of the bed, turning on the lamp. Hansen started and rolled his eyes listlessly away from the light. His eyes fluttered and opened. Disoriented, he gradually moved his head like it was a fragile glass ball. Breathing noisily through his mouth, he moved his lips to form words. Pay attention, Schell signed, then made the sign for troll, their code for Germans and Nazis. Trolls, pay attention to me, trolls. Hansen furrowed his brow. His parched lips trembled, but he looked straight at Schell. In a flash of understanding, he inclined his head. Then he signed for water.
Just such a horrifying time.
It is. I'm reading stuff right now. One of the things, you were asking a little later on about what were some of the things that struck me and doing my research and what real people were in the novel. And one of them was Conrad Bonnie Svensson. I would love to meet his great-grandchildren. He was the minister for the deaf in Norway. And this is one of these little pieces that you kind of like, well, that's interesting. And the thing is that he was very high up in the resistance and nobody knew. And near the end of the war, he had to flee to Sweden in January 1945. But they had like 5 top people, period, at the very top when everything was. And he was going around, he signed all his sermons in Norwegian sign. It's like ASL, they call it NSL. And they have 29 letters in the alphabet. They have signs for, the umlaut, the slash that's in the O, the U sound. And I just was so intrigued with that. That's why I decided I would make my character pretend to be deaf and a whole backstory of why he knows how to sign.
Yeah.
So Conrad Bonnie Svensson makes a little appearance. The other horrible person was Renan. Henry Oliver Renan was in Trondheim. He was a Norwegian. He was barely 5 feet tall, and he was a monster. At the end of the war, he was Norway's #2 war criminal after Quisling. And so he's in there. But, one of the things about writing historical fiction, now so much more is published. A lot of stuff since I started writing has now been made public, including secret coding. They released a lot of stuff in London about the Shetland bus, so you can actually see when they left. But I had like bare bones stuff that say, okay, the boat could have been here, and I can have my character could be there. I try to be as accurate in time as possible. I don't try to move stuff around, just to tell the story. I try to make it right. And the other one's the story of Televoke. That's another thing I found in Blood on the Midnight Sun. And this was an example in 1942 where 2 Gestapo agents were killed, and they came and crushed that village. They took all the men away, sent them off to German concentration camps, and separated the women and children. So that is also running the background of the story. And this summer, I'm going to Televoke. I'm going to go to the actual place and see their museum. But so those are the kind of the real things that are happening in the story. But I Conrad Bonnie Svensson, and now I'm researching Bergen. I'm doing a prequel, and I found the most amazing story of a teacher of the deaf. And I was reading a translation yesterday. I have a friend I sing in a chorale, and she's Norwegian, so she's helped me with the hard translation of some of the stuff that's beyond my stuff, and it's just heartbreaking, honestly. I hope I can go find the monument to him. But he was a wonderful person who taught the deaf, but he was, again, doing this dangerous work. Hard times, and people don't write about Norway. I think that's the other thing. Everyone's writing about France, and but I set my sight there, and I'm very glad I did.
Well, it certainly shows that your heart's there, and I've never known another author to do as extensive research as you have, even reading in that language. So I think you have done an excellent job, and I can't wait to delve into your novels. Well, Janet, as always, our very last interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite unique. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above?
Well, I say don't give up. I love what Kathy L. Murphy says, is that we all have stories to tell. It's about the story, and we all have these stories in us. And nowadays, there's so much available. When I first started over 50, really seriously trying to get published, there weren't those recesses. You could go and get an agent, you could go do this and that. And many people who are traditionally published now, they're also doing indie stuff because you have more control. So the main thing is, when you're ready to publish, try sending out small pieces. I sent out personal essays that were accepted by A Cup of Comfort. And this was put out by Writer's Digest after 9/11. And I had 5 essays published. And that was an amazing experience because I got a real editor who was editing my work, corresponding with me, and then it's published. And so you can also send out excerpts, find places that you could do. But, don't be afraid if all things dry up. Don't be afraid to self-publish, because a lot of traditional people are also doing their own marketing. And that's the hard part. That's for anybody. That's the hard part about getting known. But don't give up. Join writers groups. We have Bellingham, where I live. We're just south of the Canadian border, and we have one of the best writing communities, I think, in the country. It's amazing. And we have some very well-known authors that are hidden here. But it's really just find your group, and you can find them on Facebook. You can find them, in your local, ask at your library and connect, Don't give up.
I think that's the theme of the podcast is it's never too late. And we have so much still to give over 50. And we're just excited to now say that you're one of our authors over 50.
Well, thank you. What a cool thing.
Thank you for joining us today. please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.